Please don't die like John Witherspoon. John Witherspoon was a man, was a Hollywood actor. John Witherspoon was a very successful Hollywood actor who considered himself to be black. He considered himself to be African American. John Witherspoon lived all his life, more than 70 years old. John Witherspoon lived all his life without knowing who he was. He called himself an American. He called himself an African American. He called himself black. Please don't die like John Witherspoon. Don't die like this man. Don't live your life calling yourself African American, calling yourself black, calling yourself a person of color. You are none of those. John Witherspoon was a Hebrew. John Witherspoon was a Hebrew. He was a Hebrew. So many Hebrews are dying without knowing who they were because of what you see in Jeremiah 17 verse 4. In Jeremiah 17 verse 4, it says that you will forget who you are and that you will serve your enemy in a land that you do not know.
And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever.
Because thou servedst not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee.
So that's exactly what has happened. The prophecy in Jeremiah 17 verse 4 has finally come to pass. That prophecy has finally come true. And the so-called Negroes, the so-called blacks in America, the so-called African Americans in America, you are not African American. The so-called blacks are Hebrews. You are a Hebrew. That is your true heritage. Stop calling yourself black. Stop calling yourself African American. No one else is addressing themselves like this. Everyone else knows who they are. The Asians know who they are. The Latinos know who they are, and they have their heritage. They can go back to Latin America. The Europeans know who they are, and they have their heritage. They can go back to Europe. The Asians know who they are, and they have their heritage. They can go back to Asia. You are the only one who don't know who you are. You are the only one who call yourself African. Do you know that there's more than 50 countries in Africa? You have the Ethiopians, you have the Sudanese, the Somalis. There are different types of people in Africa. So which one of them are you? Jeremiah 17 verse 4 has finally come to pass. It has come to fulfillment. God told his people, the Hebrews, if you don't keep my laws and my commandment, I will scatter you in the four corners of the earth, and your enemies will rule over you. Those that hate you will rule over you. Your enemies, those that hate you will rule over you. That prophecy, those prophecies in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, Leviticus chapter 26, Luke chapter 21, Jubilees chapter 1. If you Google and read all these places, you will see these prophecies has finally come to pass. That is the reason why the so-called African Americans have no idea who they are. But there's a good news. The good news is that many of my brothers and my sisters who call themselves African American, many of you are waking up. That's a good news.
It would blow your mind. I'm 60 years old, and everybody who works for me is younger than me, and they'll tell you, I'll work you up under the table. I'll work you up under the table.
Where does that come from?
My father. My father, absolutely. My father is rigged. Let me tell you, this chair is about to break. My father's sitting here and my mother is sitting here, and they're fighting for the mic from moment to moment. My grandmother talks to you every now and then. All of my ancestors are sitting on this table all the way back to Nigeria. All of them. My ancestors were Igbos from Nigeria. And Igbos are called black Jews, that they're industrious, that they go after things, that they're hardworking people. So all the way back in my DNA, we were self-sufficient. And all of them are sitting here. Folks whose name I can't even call. So what we're talking about is culture, okay? And not racial culture, family culture.
So as you can see, this man, T.D. Jakes, he's happy. He's excited. He now found out who he is. He found out his true root. Your root is that you're not black. Please, that's embarrassing. That's ridiculous. Stop calling yourself black. You are not black. This is not black. Is this black? You are my brother. You are my sister. Am I black? Those people you see in 7-Eleven, those Indians you see in 7-Eleven that are selling stuff in 7-Eleven, are they black too? Are they black? Please stop calling yourself black and stop calling yourself African American. That's embarrassing. And stop calling yourself an American. You are not an American. Did you know that during the time they wrote their constitution, did you know that when the Americans wrote their constitution, they said that you are not a full human being, that you are a 3/4 of a human being? That is what their constitution says. Please stop calling yourself black. Please, America was built against you. America was built because of you. America was built because of you and your ancestors and your people. Why? Because God is the one that sent the Americans against you to take you as slaves, just like he said that he would.
Because thou servedst not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle.
Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. He said that you will go into slavery again in ships.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen. And no man shall buy you.
So America is a nation against you. The Most High raised America against you to take you as slave and to oppress you and to slaughter you. That's why they are killing you and your brothers more than they kill other people. Do you see Americans in the throat of the Asians? Do you see white Americans doing to the Asians what they're doing to you? Do you see them doing to Latinos what they're doing to you? The way they're shooting down your men on the street, the way they're killing your pregnant women. Do you see them doing this? So you have to understand who you are. You're not black. You're not African American. You're not an American. You are a Hebrew. And your ancestor was kicked out of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Your ancestor was kicked out of Jerusalem in 70 AD.
The historian Josephus actually witnessed the siege and aftermath and said, "Now as soon as the army had no more people to slay or to plunder, because there remained none to be the objects of their fury, Titus Caesar gave orders that they should now demolish the entire city and temple." Other than a few towers and forts for the Roman garrison, everything was destroyed. It was so thoroughly laid even with the ground by those that dug it up to the foundation that there was left nothing to make those that came thither believe Jerusalem had ever been inhabited. The Wars of the Jews, or History of the Destruction of Jerusalem, Book 7, Chapter 1. Then, about 60 years later, the Roman Emperor Hadrian commenced with finishing the job of the complete Romanization of Jerusalem and much of the land of Israel. By 135 AD, nearly 600,000 Judeans were killed, and over 1,000 towns and villages were razed to the ground. The practice of the Mosaic Law was prohibited, the sacred scrolls were burned, and circumcision was outlawed. After Hadrian, all that remained on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem were a few Roman statues.
And I'd like to now bring up another interesting place that you're finding descendants of the Israelites, but may not necessarily be from the 10 tribes, but will also play a role. And it shouldn't be overlooked. It's a very serious scenario. There's is in Africa. Africa has perhaps hundreds of millions of people with this identity right now of being from the people of Israel. Does that mean they were from the 10 tribes? Likely not. We were taught by the historians and within our own traditions that when the Romans conquered Judea a few hundred years after that the tribes of Israel went into exile, perhaps millions of Judeans were sold into slavery, into Africa, into Rome, deep into Africa. And if you look now, you're seeing people who are most likely the descendants of those slaves who kept true. Another area in Africa you have something big happening is in Nigeria. You have the Igbo people, or Igbo, pronounced either way. There's 40 million of them, also Christians, like I spoke about before, how that could happen to the children of Israel very easily. But also a lot of them are now coming out and converting back or adopting the rules of the Torah without all the paganism that they've been practicing for hundreds of years. There's been books written about it from scholars in Nigeria, from scholars from the Jewish people. And where it gets interesting is, in America, there was a slave trade. And a lot of the slaves, a very high percentage of them, came from Western Nigerian ports. And in America today, you see a very large movement of African Americans who say that they're the real chosen people, that they're the children of Israel, they're the Judeans. You know, so what are they just trying to create an identity for themselves because they were slaves, or is there really something here? And the answer is most likely there is something there.
It would blow your mind. I'm 60 years old, and everybody who works for me is younger than me, and they'll tell you, I'll work you up under the table. I'll work you up under the table.
Where does that come from?
My father. My father. Absolutely. My father is real. Let me tell you, this chair is about to break. My father's sitting here and my mother is sitting here, and they're fighting for the mic from moment to moment. My grandmother talks to you every now and then. All of my ancestors are sitting on this table all the way back to Nigeria. All of them. My ancestors were Igbos from Nigeria. And Igbos are called black Jews, that they're industrious, that they go after things, that they're hard-working people. So all the way back in my DNA, we were self-sufficient. And all of them are sitting here. Folks whose name I can't even call. So what we're talking about is culture, okay? And not racial culture, family culture.
It's known as the Roman invasion of Jerusalem. Study this. Look into it. Look into history. It was in 70 AD that the Roman Empire invaded Jerusalem and slaughtered so many Hebrews and destroyed everything, knocked the whole buildings down, destroyed the whole city of Jerusalem. That was when your ancestor migrated into Africa, just like it says in Luke chapter 21. Just like it says in Luke 21. Your ancestors migrated into Africa and settled in Western Africa. And then in the 1600, the same descendant of the Roman Empire, who were now known as the Europeans, they came and they took you from Africa as slaves and took you towards the Americas, where you are today. And Jeremiah 17 verse 4 has finally come to pass. You don't know who you are anymore. You're calling yourself black. You're calling yourself African American. Please stop calling yourself that. That's embarrassing. Stop saying you're black. You are a Hebrew. Go to the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Exodus, the book of Leviticus. That's where you see your heritage. That's where go and read the book of the law, Deuteronomy, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus. Read those books. That's where you see your history. And I'm not talking about Christianity. We are not Christians. Christianity is a pagan religion. Let me slow down and say it. Christianity is a pagan religion that came from our enemies. The Europeans are our enemies. God sent the Europeans against us, just like he sent the Babylonians against us in the past. Just like he sent the Greeks against us in the past. Just like he sent the Philistines against us in the past. Just like he sent the Assyrians against us in the past. The Europeans today are our enemies. That's why they're on your throat. That's why they are murdering your children, killing your pregnant women, shooting down your brothers on the street, and locking you up in their prisons. The Most High sent them against us because we refuse to keep the law. We must go back and begin to keep all the laws and the commandment of our God that you see in the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Exodus, the book of Leviticus. We have to keep those laws. We are in trouble today. We've lost our identity today because we don't know because we were breaking God's law. We must go back and begin to keep God's law. We must go back and begin to keep God's law. That's why this is happening. That's why you don't know who you are. That's why you're in America. That's why the white people are on your throat. That's why you're dying without knowing who you are. That's why you're sick. That's why you're struggling financially. You are going through the courses of Deuteronomy chapter 28. Please read all these places. As a man or a woman, as a man, of course, you're supposed to grow your beard. As a woman, you're supposed to keep all the laws and the commandment of the Most High. All of us have to keep the law. We have to wear our fringes. We have to dress like Hebrews. You don't know about this anymore because you've been educated by your enemies. Your enemies have educated you. Your enemies, the Europeans, have educated you and told you that you're a person of color. You're a person of color. You're African American. And you believe them. Are you stupid? Are you stupid by believing that you're a person of color? What does a person of color mean? What does black mean? What does African American mean? Africa, America, that's two continents. Why would you call yourself African American? That's dumb. Stop calling yourself that. You are a Hebrew and you must go back, and we all must go back. And I have. You have to. I have, and you have to. We all must go back and begin to keep the laws and the commandment of our God. Otherwise, you will soon die, just like John Witherspoon. And please don't die like John Witherspoon. Open your eyes. Stop calling yourself black and go back and begin to keep the laws and the commandment of your God. Begin to keep his laws and his commandment. You are not a Christian. You are not black. You are not African American. You are not an American. You are not a person of color. You are a Hebrew. That's who you are. Begin to keep God's laws and the commandment. If you have any question, feel free to ask. Go back and look into this. Look into this. Don't do a DNA test. Don't forget about that nonsense DNA test. You have to go back and begin to keep the law. Your heritage, your identity is all locked up in those books. The book of Exodus, Google it. The book of Deuteronomy, Google it. The book of Leviticus, Google it. The book of Numbers, Google it. The book of Jubilees, Google it. It's in your phone. Google it and read those places and begin to keep the laws and the commandment of God. Don't die like John Witherspoon, who died and wasted away not knowing who he was. That's a shameful thing. That's a sad thing. I don't want you to die. Die in the land of your enemy, like it says in the Leviticus chapter 26. I don't want you to die and not knowing who you are. I don't want you to die and not knowing who you are and continuing to break the laws of God. We must, whether we like it or not, whether you like it or not, you must go back and begin to keep God's laws. We must all go back and begin to keep God's laws. Please don't die like John Witherspoon. Look into this. You are a Hebrew. We are suffering today. You are in the land of your enemy and you're suffering, and we're suffering because we refuse to keep God's laws. It's time for us to wake up and go back and begin to keep all the laws and the commandment of God. If just like Christ told us, even Christ told us in Matthew 23 that we must keep the laws of God. Open your eyes. Go back and start keeping the laws and the commandment of God. Matthew chapter 23 verse 1 to 3. Matthew 23 verse 1 to 3. Revelation chapter 22:14. If you read these places, Christ said that we must keep all the laws of God. Forget what your pastor is telling you. Forget what your pastor have taught you. That's absolute garbage, because Christianity came from our enemies and the Europeans are our enemies, and God raised them up against us, just like he told us that he will raise our enemy against us to take us as slaves. That's exactly what's happening today. That's why you don't know who you are. That's why John Witherspoon died without knowing who he was. Please look into this. Start keeping the laws and commandment of God. You must begin to keep his laws and his commandment. If you have any question, feel free to ask. All praises to our Heavenly Father.